Good afternoon. My name is Shioni Flegel, and I'm the Executive Director at Housing California. We're so proud to be welcoming you today alongside U.S. Senator Alex Padilla for a roundtable discussion about housing, homelessness, and how federal resources and policies can support our collective efforts to reduce homelessness and increase access to affordable housing here in California. For nearly 50 years, Housing California has pursued state-level systems and policy changes to grow the supply of affordable homes, solve homelessness, and protect low-income renters. To accomplish this, we're really privileged to work with a statewide network of housing developers, homeless service providers, housing justice advocates, and people with firsthand experience of navigating the affordable housing and homelessness system across California. You're going to meet some of our partners today and hear their stories. Inevitably, many of the kinds of statewide successes we pursue along with our partners are tied in deep federal partnerships and programs. We can't do our work in California without the partnership of the federal government. For example, here in our state, more than 30% of our budget comes from federal sources, and most of those federal dollars support critical safety net programs that protect Californians from the destabilizing forces of health and financial emergencies. They provide the framework that allows our communities to be stable and to thrive. Effective partnerships where federal, state, and local leaders are all accountable for investing at scale in solutions that work are more important now, perhaps, than ever. That's why we're here today. Before we get started, I did want to just take a minute on housekeeping to give a special thanks to the folks who made this event possible. I want to start by thanking our friend and colleague, Matt Huerta. Matt is a consultant based in Salinas who works across the state, supporting and joining with others to advance solutions to homelessness and housing for all. I want to give a special shout out to my staff at Housing California who helped to coordinate this event and who move our advocacy and organizing work forward every day. I want to thank our panelists who are partners that we have the privilege of working deeply with and who have stepped up to share the stories of their success and showcase what's possible when federal programs and investments remove barriers and create pathways for us to do the great work that's happening across California. And finally, I want to thank Senator Padilla, who's been an incredible champion for justice and housing affordability for many, many years, long before he became our U.S. Senator, and who continues to carry our voice in charge in Washington, D.C. Now I want to pass it over to Senator Padilla to share a few opening remarks and to help launch our conversation.
Great. Wonderful. Thank you for setting the stage here and for the introduction. And good afternoon, everybody. I want to begin by thanking Housing California and all the stakeholders who have joined today. It's pretty simple. If you're on this event, that means that you're committed to helping solve the housing crisis and to doing your part. And we know that it's not going to be easy, but we all know what it's possible when state and local governments and local organizations work together and we commit the resources that are necessary to provide housing options for working families across California and across the country. We know we can make progress because we have been making progress. Just one data point. Last year, the United States reached a record low in veteran homelessness, at least since we first started measuring in 2009. So we are making progress. We can measure it, and we should be proud of that. But unfortunately, that progress is being threatened. We're seeing the current administration, yes, the Trump administration, trying to lead us in the wrong direction. Now, I'm going to say a couple things here that I want to make clear is not me being political. This is just me being very factual as to what we have to confront. We have an administration that has threatened and in some cases applied reckless tariffs that have the effect of raising the cost of construction materials, which makes it harder to build more needed housing. We have seen proposals to make massive cuts to federal housing programs and services. And even though what's proposed in the budget isn't final yet, and I'm sure we'll talk about that during the course of today's events, There have been efforts by the administration in recent months to either freeze funding, try to claw back funding, to freeze hiring, and even dismiss a lot of federal workers that we depend on to keep the federal programs moving when it comes to housing. And finally, we've heard of threats to close regional HUD offices, including in California. So we know how much we rely on that regional HUD leadership to advance some of these programs and specific projects to help us address the housing challenges that we have. And so we have to be aware of the threats, continue to strategize and push back on the threats. But I guess one of the big takeaways from those observations is the last thing that we should be doing is to be taking away resources, staff, and programs that so many of us rely on to make progress when it comes to offering more housing options to our constituents. So please count on me to continue to keep an eye out and to speak up when there are threats to housing services and resources that so many Californians rely on. Now, I also want to be very clear that it's one thing to be against the cuts and against the proposals that we think would actually be harmful. We know that to be effective in the long term, we also have to be proactive in some of the positive proposals and actions that we need to increase the housing supply in California and throughout the country. That's why just last month, I reintroduced my Housing for All Act, a bill that calls for historic federal investments in the housing programs that we need and to scale up a lot of the creative solutions that cities and states have already deployed throughout the state and throughout the country. And at the same time, I am continuing to work across the aisle to improve housing for disaster victims, for example, and to help reduce rural homelessness, and to allow more disabled veterans to access the HUD VASH program. And I'm hopeful by some of the openness and response I've been getting from some of my Republican colleagues. And I know as well as you do that there are real, scalable, creative housing solutions that are out there. We just need to get the resources to deploy them and to scale them up. So today, I'd like to contribute some to the conversation, but I'm also eager to listen from all of you about what your experiences have been, what your successes have been, what your creative solutions are that we should all be rallying around. So as I hear from the other speakers, hoping to hear some of your success stories, some of the challenges that you've encountered that we can work together to overcome, to improve our programs. And it makes me a more effective advocate on your behalf when I can take those practical experiences to my colleagues here in Washington as part of our deliberations, part of our debate, and part of our actions. Lastly, before I wrap my initial remarks, I do want to make a few comments in Spanish for the Spanish language press that is participating today. Muy buenas tardes y gracias por acompañarnos en este evento virtual. Les quiero agradecer a los líderes de Housing California y a los líderes de todas las organizaciones participando hoy que están comprometidos a ayudarnos a asegurar que hay suficientes viviendas acosteables para californianos y en todas áreas del país. Para los líderes y organizaciones participando hoy, sabemos que tenemos su compromiso en encontrar soluciones para la crisis de vivienda que estamos viendo en muchas regiones del país. Sabemos que no será fácil, pero también sabemos que lo que es posible cuando trabajamos juntos, cuando nos unimos líderes del gobierno federal, estatal y local, junto con líderes en la industria y con las organizaciones no lucrativas, para asegurar que tenemos los recursos necesarios para proveer las viviendas necesitadas en cada comunidad. Sabemos que es posible porque el año pasado, por ejemplo, la falta de hogar entre veteranos alcanzó un mínimo histórico, un nivel más bajo desde que comenzamos a colectar estos datos. Así es que es una medida, por ejemplo, del éxito que debemos de celebrar. Pero lamentablemente vemos amenazas a los recursos de los programas tan necesitados en California y en otras áreas del país. Quiero ofrecer unas observaciones de la administración que no son políticas, pero son la verdad de lo que estamos viendo. Esta administración, bajo Donald Trump, está aplicando aranceles que aumentarán el costo de los materiales de construcción, haciéndolo más difícil y más costoso construir nuevas viviendas costeables en California, en el país. Vemos una administración que quiere implementar recortes masivos a los programas y servicios federales de vivienda, haciéndolo más difícil proveer la ayuda y el apoyo que estamos ofreciendo hoy en día. Y vemos una administración que propone el cierre de oficinas regionales de HUD, el Departamento de Viviendas Federales. Es lo último que debemos de hacer en este momento. Necesitamos más apoyo y más recursos, no menos. Por eso quiero que sepan que pueden seguir contando conmigo. Cuando veo estas amenazas, voy a estar opuesto y llamar la atención lo mejor posible, pero también reconozco que no es suficiente estar opuesto a las propuestas de la administración, pero también debemos de ofrecer nuestra visión, nuestras ideas, nuestras soluciones a la crisis de viviendas en el país. Por eso tenemos que ser proactivos en esta agenda. Por eso el mes pasado reintrodují mi ley de vivienda para todos, un proyecto de ley para realizar inversiones federales históricos en programas federales de vivienda y soluciones creativas que ciudades y estados ya han implementado con éxito en diferentes áreas del país. Al mismo tiempo, estoy trabajando en propuestas bipartidistas para mejorar las viviendas de las víctimas de desastres, por ejemplo, una idea que sí goza apoyo de republicanos y demócratas, y también de ayudar a reducir la falta de viviendas en zonas rurales y permitir que más veteranos con discapacidad acceden del programa HUD-BASH. Sabemos que existen estas soluciones de viviendas reales, escalables y creativas, pero merecen nuestro apoyo y recursos necesarios para seguir implementando en diferentes áreas del estado y del país. Y con eso me da mucho gusto escuchar de los líderes de viviendas en este programa hoy para ofrecer más ideas y más pruebas con mis colegas aquí en Washington para seguir haciendo el progreso juntos. Muchísimas gracias por acompañarnos hoy. And with that, just thank you again all for participating. I'm eager to hear from the other speakers, and we'll take some questions at the end.
Thank you, Senator. And good evening, everyone. Thank you again for joining us today on this important discussion on housing. We have a number of great panelists representing different regions of the state with us today, from the Inland Empire to Sacramento to everything in between. So our first speaker that we have here is Lourdes Castro Ramirez. She's the president and CEO of the Housing Authority of the City of Los Angeles, which is the second largest public housing authority in the nation. So Lourdes, welcome, and I'll kick it off to you for remarks. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Good afternoon. Muy buenas tardes. Thank you, Senator Padilla and Housing California, for bringing us together to elevate the positive impact of federal housing and homelessness programs on our communities. As mentioned by Edward, I'm Lourdes Castro Ramirez, and I serve as the president and CEO of the Housing Authority of the City of Los Angeles. HACLA is the state's largest affordable housing authority, serving over 200,000 Angelenos through public housing, mixed-income communities, and rental assistance programs. Nearly 90% of our funding comes from federal sources, support that is essential to our mission in investing in people and places and expanding housing opportunities across Los Angeles. Federal rental assistance programs like Section 8 and the Emergency Housing Voucher Program have not only been housing solutions, they are also lifelines. In high-cost rental markets, they provide families with the stability necessary to flourish, enhancing school attendance, improving health outcomes, and facilitating economic mobility for low-income households and veterans. Without these rental assistance programs, numerous individuals would face housing insecurity and homelessness. But rental assistance is also a powerful local economic driver. In LA, these federal subsidies flow into the local economy to 13,000 property owners, proving that public-private partnerships can effectively bolster the housing market and create stability for families over time. Thanks to Congress, housing authorities across the country receive special vouchers to house people experiencing homelessness. In LA, we received nearly 3,400 emergency housing vouchers and were able to lease them up very quickly thanks to the exceptional leadership from Mayor Bass and the strong city-county collaboration with property owners and service providers. And we need sustained support to build on this progress. HUD projects that emergency housing vouchers the funding for this program will run out by 2026, putting about 60,000 families and individuals across the country at risk of losing their homes and returning back to homelessness. In LA, 3,100 households still depend on these vouchers, and nearly 1/3 of them include children under the age of 18, and close to 600 households are seniors over the age of 60. Rental assistance programs work. Vouchers have been a lifeline for countless families, unlocking access to affordable housing, transforming lives, and helping our communities thrive. As we work to increase housing production, we must also protect and expand rental assistance. And now I would like to turn it over to Pip to share her story of how federal rental assistance played a transformative role for her family. Pip, over
Thank
to
you
you.
so much. I appreciate that. Thank you so much, Ms. Ramirez. So yes, my safe name is Pip because our family is actively fleeing domestic violence. And if it wasn't for this wonderful blessing of the Section 8 emergency housing voucher, our family would be on the streets right now. Let me tell you that this blessing has not only put a roof over our heads, but it has allowed our children to flourish and thrive academically and as viable, wonderful people of society. The situation happened when our children were young and they were forced to attend courts. They were subpoenaed to testify against the abusive individual, and we were homeless on more than 2 occasions. When we were blessed with the emergency housing voucher, our children were then able to focus on their education so that one has now graduated from a 4-year university and is now giving back to the community, working at a 501c. And the youngest is now attending college and will complete in another 2 years, also wanting to do something to give back to the community. To be a parent and to know that you're going to be on the street with your children and not know what the next steps are is devastating. But if it wasn't for HACLA and the wonderful people who have been there to answer the call of helping serve someone and their children who were in desperate, dire need, who needed a safe place and who needed to be treated with dignity, is priceless. So these federally funded programs work. As Ms. Ramirez said, there are families that we have not chosen to be homeless, but we have definitely appreciated being blessed with the opportunity to be able to succeed in this form. And me, myself, I returned to school. So thank you for giving us the opportunity to increase the value of ourselves as humans and for treating us like important people. And this is a shout out to Ms. Watson, who is my advisor at HACLA, She has been fantastic. It has answered every question I've ever asked, and I asked a lot. And our children are also very grateful to the HECLA program in general from the start until where we are now. Thank you for saving us from the streets.
Thank you, Pip. Thank you for reminding us that housing is about people. Thank you for sharing your story. And now back over to you, Edgar.
Thanks, Lourdes, and thanks again, Pip, for sharing your story. Our next speaker is Tom Collishaw. Tom is the president and CEO of Self-Help Enterprises, a multifaceted nonprofit housing community development organization serving the San Joaquin Valley since 1965. So thanks for joining us, Tom, and I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, Edgar, and thank you, Senator, for this important conversation. I want to tell you a little bit about Esmeralda Melicio Lopez. She's about to get the keys to a home that she built along with her neighbors from the ground up through our mutual self-help housing program in Fresno. Self-Help Enterprises has been doing this program successfully for 60 years now, and it's been a big part of how we've been able to help people change their lives here in the Central Valley. The way the program works is we get groups of families together that provide their down payment through labor, and it's a significant labor program where they put into typically 1,500 hours per family. And the way the program works is we start 10 or 11 families. They all start the same day on those 10 or 11 houses, and nobody moves in until all 10 or 11 are done. So it's that shared labor and collaboration that really makes a difference and makes it a unique program. Homeownership still works for low-income people here in the Central Valley. With assistance from great programs like USDA Rural Development's 523 Mutual Self-Help Housing Program, 502 Direct Mortgages that are the best mortgage product that the country has, the home program, CDBG programs, and other state and local programs. The partnership with the city of Fresno on Esmeralda's home was critical as they invested $1.4 million for 22 self-help homes in gap financing, soft secondary financing loans. We also work to develop affordable rental housing with a sizable percentage of our portfolio dedicated to farm workers and their families. And importantly, we have built a robust assistance program in working with disadvantaged rural communities with assistance for them to create or restore access to clean water and sanitary sewer systems that are so essential to being able to develop housing opportunities or preserve housing opportunities. But going back to home ownership just for a moment, we've been able to assist nearly 7,000 families, just like Esmeralda Lopez, to achieve their dream of owning a home of their own. It's really the American dream, still is. And while affordable housing opportunities writ large are needed across the board, we have found that homeownership is the one opportunity that succeeds in breaking cycles of generational poverty, and as such needs to remain part of our commitment to housing our most vulnerable populations. When I met Esmeralda, she talked about the years that she watched homeownership opportunities just slip through her fingers because she didn't have the down payment or the costs were going up to a large degree. And this was a key to making that work for her. And to quote her to end, she said, "We didn't just build a house, we built a community and a future." Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. Appreciate it. Up next, we would now like to welcome Heather Hood, who's a Vice President and Northern California Market Leader for Enterprise Community Partners. At Enterprise, Heather directs program work for Northern California to ensure residents live in quality homes that are both affordable and connected to opportunity. So welcome, Heather.
Thank you, Edgar. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Senator Padilla, for your leadership and stamina. I'll tell you a little bit about Enterprise to give you a sense of how we work and where we work and what we're doing and how it's felt here in California. Enterprise is a national nonprofit that exists to make a good home possible for the millions of families without one. We support the community development organizations on the ground, like Self-Help, to aggregate and invest capital for impact, advance affordable housing policy at every level of government, and even build and manage communities ourselves in some places. And just to give you a sense of scale, since 1982, we have invested over 81 billion and created 1 million homes across all 50 states. So we have a strong presence in California, and some of our work here includes, for example, in the Bay Area, we conceived of and have shepherded the creation of the Bay Area Housing Finance Agency, or Authority, excuse me. We call it BAFA affectionately. We're working with BAFA and many partners to position the region to secure catalytic investments that will sustain the work into the future. And another example of our work is throughout the state, my team has led technical assistance to work in every county, and actually here in the Bay Area, in almost every city, for the state's Affordable Housing and Sustainable Communities program. That's focusing on getting affordable housing near high quality public transportation. In the past 8 years, that's been about $4 billion to advance that work. So I just want to start with a sense of what we'd love to see at the federal level. And first, I think it's important when we talk about housing to center it on people like Pip and Esmeralda. There are so many more people with a variety of struggles and so many things that need to be tailored. To think of thriving neighborhoods, we think of them as not just the unit, but places where ferry drivers, artists, waiters, teachers, and doctors can all live in proximity to one another, where children can have the chance to move back to live near their families and to raise children in proximity to their grandparents. So this is not just for a little bit of time, it's about generations. And this kind of community is not only possible with diversity of housing, not just affordable housing, but all types of densities, renters and homeowners. So with that, I just want to give you a sense of the proportion of what's needed in the Bay Area. Our Bay Area Pipeline report from 2024 took a real close look at the number of new homes that were needed and the kind of sources of funding needed. These are homes that are stalled in the construction pipeline. They're entitled, they're ready to go, but for having resources. So there are 433 affordable housing developments in the pre-development, what we call purgatory. That's over 40,000 homes that are ready to go if there were resources for them, public resources. So I'll highlight a few policies, federal policies and resources that could enable and unlock those for Bay Area families. And the first is the Low-Income Housing Tax Credit Program, otherwise known as LIHTC. The LIHTC program is the nation's most successful financing tool for building and preserving affordable rental homes. And Enterprise has seen that impact all across the country, including in California. Here, just some statistics. In California, through just a couple of years ago, the program had developed or preserved just under 500,000 homes, serving 1 million low-income households, and supported 730,000 jobs a year. It's also leveraging resources. So these are homes that didn't just depend on the public resource or the LIHTC. I'll give you an example here in San Francisco, where I'm sitting right now. A LIHTC project that led to significant permanent affordable housing is called Sunnydale, here in San Francisco, led by and built by Mercy Housing and Related California. This was a former dilapidated public housing project. At full build out, this new Sunnydale community will consist of 1,700 mixed income homes with education centers, health centers, small businesses, retail, and more. And I bring it up because it's a shining example of a public-private partnership that leveraged those public resources for additional dollars, thanks to the U.S. LIHTC program. And it's a scalable program. So supporting it now, most recently, as I'm sure, Senator, you know, affordable housing interests and senators have reintroduced the Affordable Housing Credit Improvement Act in 2025. And there's an identical version of this bill now in the House that was reintroduced. This bipartisan act would restore the now expired 2012.5 expansion of the 9% housing tax credit and lower the current 50% bond. And that would unlock a significant amount of money that could be felt immediately here in California. So the next one I'll just highlight, and I realize we don't have a lot of time, is Section 4. And there's already a small victory story there. I'd love to see it protected so it doesn't take so much energy to fight for it in the future. This is a program since 1993 that has been very successful. It provides capacity building grants that go directly to communities to help build and preserve affordable homes. It's shown stark success. Just to give you a sense, for every dollar the US HUD invests and shares with a group like Enterprise and we pass through, it leverages $95 in funding and resources for local communities. So in the past 10 years in California, we've deployed Section 4 grants to over 700 organizations, and it's created over almost 4,500 homes. So this is a pretty significant program. It helps organizations like Self-Help and many others. And I have the good news to say that while our HUD contract was previously canceled by the administration this past winter, just last month, we were able to gather 1,500 signatures. And now, with the bipartisan support, we can share the news that this appeal reinstated the critical funding that Section 4 provides. So it's these kind of solutions that can address the persistent housing crisis felt here in the Bay Area. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we invite Tamara Kohler to join us. Tamara is the Regional Task Force on Homelessness CEO in San Diego and is recognized as a subject matter on homelessness systems, data, and strategic planning. She's also nationally known for effective work in San Diego, Seattle, the state of Utah in addressing homelessness. So thank you for joining us, Tamara. I'll hand it over to you.
Well, thank you, Edgar. And thank you. And good afternoon from the most southern part of the state in San Diego. I'm really honored to join you, Senator, and all of the panelists on probably one of the most important conversations we currently have. As a continuum of care, we are fully funded through HUD, so through the federal government, and authorized to do this work. There are 44 continuums of care across the state. There are nearly 400 of us across the nation. And our singular role is to work on the issues and think about how we address homelessness in a coordinated and collaborative way. We bring together community partners, including our housing authorities. I was really touched to hear Pip's story about the emergency housing vouchers. The emergency housing vouchers are a partnership between continuums of care and housing authorities to recognize those experiencing homelessness who would thrive and be successful with this really important resource. Continuums of care do some very unique things for the federal government on a local level. We collect the data. We are able to recognize the trends of what is happening in our communities. One of the most challenging and concerning trends that we're seeing today is the increase of senior homelessness. And in fact, it's that time of year when we share the data around what is known as the point in time count, that singular night that we do a census of folks experiencing homelessness. A number of years ago, as we were looking at our census data, we found that we were seeing a significant increase in folks that were 55 or older experiencing homelessness for the first time. And we began to see this trend that has only increased. What it allows us to do as a continuum of care is then to reach out within our community to see who serves that population, to work with our aging and independent services at the county, to wrap our arms around a senior population that unfortunately today represents 30% of our unsheltered population and 1 in 4 in our emergency shelters. If we didn't collect the data, coordinate around what we're seeing the trends are, and be able to report that both locally and on a state level and federally, we would be blind to what the needs are and what is coming. The data we collect is critical to be able to not only coordinate our funding, but to also coordinate against multiple levels of funding and support. One of the important pieces that we do is focus on those vulnerable populations, our young adults that are exiting foster care, or others transitioning who need a little bit of assistance. The DV population is important. We work on this system of care, so coordinating multiple funding sources, including philanthropic, to really address the needs. There's no other way to address homelessness but with housing and increasing housing stock, access to housing, and being able to work as much as we can to prevent homelessness. That's where the data is so important and the trends really lead us in the right direction. We are excited to see that as we've had investments that have been historic and coordination at a level that has not been seen before, that in California, we're starting to see a trend to turn to where we're finally seeing a reduction in homelessness. As the senator mentioned, we lead with veteran homelessness seeing significant reductions. But I think when you will see point in time counts come out across the state and nationally, you'll start to see some reductions in the numbers that are experiencing homelessness. That is why it's so important to double down on what we know is working. We need the funding coming to our housing authorities. We coordinate with the affordable housing development to make sure that they're serving and preparing for the right populations. We lead a system approach, which is locally informed, state funded, and federally funded. We lean into how we might be able to keep people in housing and help them stabilize, connecting them to employment or other really important supportive services. There's no other conversation today in any community that isn't anchored in housing and the fear that others will experience homelessness. And it's why these conversations are so critical. It's why the federal funding coming to our communities on a local level, coordinated across all of the incredible panelists that we've heard from today, culminate in a experience that Pip shared, that if anyone experiences a crisis, they have something to connect to in their community, that they have housing resources at the ready, that they have support that's wrapped around them to meet their needs, and that we're really able to lean into stability and strengthening the housing stock to reduce that trauma and that stress across all populations for all people in California, so that our communities thrive and that we're able to address the needs today to be able to have a California that we want for tomorrow. Thank you, Edgar.
Thank you, Tim. I appreciate it. And finally, we'd like to invite Shioni Flegel, the Executive Director of Housing California, just back to share some of the work that's happening at the statewide level and to close out our panel before we move on to the questions. But Shioni.
Thank you, Edgar. And thank you to all of today's speakers for grounding this conversation in what's possible when communities are resourced, trusted, and supported by government at every level. As I mentioned at the top, Housing California is a statewide advocacy organization working towards system-level change to address California's housing and homelessness crisis. Over the past 9 months, we've been working to update what we call Roadmap Home, which is our bold policy roadmap to create the future we want for California by building 1 million new affordable homes, protecting 1 million low-income renter households, solving homelessness, and addressing the deep racial and economic inequities that are built into our housing system. What we've heard as we've traveled around the state talking to our partners is that we can't do it alone. No matter who we talk to, where we talk to folks, what we hear is that we need deeper capacity and leadership across the full continuum of governance functions at all levels of government, from how we finance housing to how it's regulated to how people access the services that allow them to stay housed. The solutions we're working towards, the things people have talked about today, don't happen in a vacuum. They're only possible with leadership, partnership, accountability, and a shared commitment at the local, state, and federal level to ensuring that every person in this country has access to that most basic human need, a home. We've already seen what's possible when that partnership exists. As Heather shared, we have used our low-income housing tax credit program to support the development of over 500,000 affordable homes in California. Right now, at Housing California, we're working with members of the state legislature and many of the partners on this call to advance a $10 billion housing bond through the legislature so that it will be on the 2026 ballot as a way to open the door for affordable housing projects in the pipeline and move forward with new housing investments. But the success of that bond and what we're able to do with it will in part depend on the partnership of the federal government. Our LIHTC program, our housing choice vouchers, those are really important tools to make sure that our state money can go further. Today, federal housing programs support nearly 1 million people in California, offering stability and opportunity to the families who need it most. But we know that the need still far outweighs the reach of our programs. For every household that receives a housing choice voucher in California, 3 more are left waiting, sometimes for years. We work with a group of residents who have benefited from affordable housing programs in the Residents United Network. And they share stories of being on wait lists for 10 to 15 years before they're able to secure dignified housing. This is a reflection of the reality that there simply aren't enough resources, vouchers, affordable homes available, and that we have more to do to support the people who really need us. Alongside our run leaders, we're working on winning reforms that would help address these barriers, but we need our federal government partners to meet us in the effort. It's also important to say this before we close. What used to be considered a California-specific housing crisis is now national. For decades, federal investments in housing have declined while the need has grown. We are now at a turning point where we have a choice. We can retreat and let this crisis continue to grow, or we can meet the moment with bold investments in our collective future. If we choose to invest at the scale the moment demands, we can make sure families aren't waiting 10 years for a safe place to live. We can make sure farm workers, teachers, nurses, our grocery store workers aren't living in their car even as they're working full time, that parents don't have to choose between rent, groceries, or safety. As we've heard today, we already have the tools and the models to get this work done. Now we need the political will to fully fund and scale the solutions that are working. Housing isn't just about buildings, it's about dignity, health, stability, and the ability to plan for your future. We imagine a California and a country where our success is measured by the well-being of our communities, and that begins with a safe, stable, affordable place to call home. I want to thank Senator Padilla again for creating a space to share these stories this afternoon, and to everyone here who continues to move this work forward. I'm going to pass it back over to Senator Padilla's team to take some questions.
Thank you, Shioni. Appreciate it. And as is the nature of being in session, votes have been called. But before we let the senator go, I'll just offer Lourdes here the opportunity to ask one question and have the senator answer and offer some closing thoughts after that. So Lourdes, go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And Senator, thank you again for bringing us together. Thank you for your incredible leadership and for ensuring that this conversation about housing continues to be front and center. As you mentioned, the recently released skinny budget is proposing more cuts, in fact, in the housing space, about a 40% reduction in the HUD budget. And so as we continue doing the work in communities, as we continue working with property owners and residents and local governments, can you provide us with what you're hearing in Washington from your colleagues, your housing committee colleagues and appropriators? I think we're all looking for reassurance and optimism.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the question. And so I have a couple of thoughts on the 40% reduction proposal. And I'm going to end with a little bit of a call to action. But before I forget, I just want to mention 2 things. First, thank you for inviting Pip to be part of this conversation. I want to respect the request for privacy, but I think it's worth commending the courage that it takes to share a story like that, because it's, as you mentioned at the beginning, it's not just housing and structures. This is individuals, these are families. This is about dignity and respect. So I wanted to make sure to acknowledge Pip and say thank you. I also want to reference the emergency housing vouchers that so many of the speakers reference. It's one of the other specific areas that we continue to go to bat with the Appropriations Committee and the process between now and September to ensure we maintain, if not actually grow, the capacity on emergency housing vouchers because we know how critical they are for people who depend on them. Now, to your point about the quote unquote skinny budget, for those less familiar with the federal budget process and more familiar with either the state budget process or a local budget process, what's referred to as the skinny budget is really akin to the governor's proposed budget that he releases every January. There's an initial framework that the legislature in California organizes their hearings around. There's initial proposals, what's good, what's bad, and then you kind of wait for final, more dependable numbers to flesh out before changes are made and a final budget is adopted. Same thing at Congress. The president proposes a skinny budget, depending on the majorities in the House of Representatives or in the Senate. Maybe a lot of it is seriously considered, maybe very little is seriously considered before a final spending plan is adopted by Congress towards the end of the fiscal year, or if recent history is any indicator, we'll give ourselves an extension until the end of the calendar year and try to finalize a budget then. Anyway, that's a lot of process talk, a long way of saying this 40% proposal is just that. It's a proposal. It is not final decision that has been made, and we're going to do everything we can to push against these steep cuts that we know would harm families across the country. I'd like to say I feel good about that, but everything has just been so chaotic and extreme since the beginning of this administration that we have to take it seriously. And so here's maybe a little bit of our call to action, not just against this 40% reduction proposal, but for a lot of the ideas we've heard, suggestions we've heard to cut funding, cut programs, lay off staff. We need everybody to do their part. Everybody who's logged into this session, be part of the coalition. Many of you are already active with Housing California already. Maybe some are not. That should be. A lot of you are also members of national associations or national groups. We need to engage colleagues and counterparts in other states, particularly those with Republican senators, to hear these stories that you've shared with me that are happening in those other states, so that senators are as fully informed as to the potential impacts, the devastating impacts of bad decision making. So, again, we're hopeful. We have progress that we can point to from recent years. We're hopeful because we have strong arguments to make, not just moral arguments, but economic arguments. It's better for the economy. It's better for the federal and state budgets when more people are housed as opposed to being unhoused. But we can't leave anything to chance. So any individual here is going to be an effective advocate. But when we work together, our strength and our advocacy is that much stronger. So we have to get engaged and stay engaged and continue to share information, whether it's through the coalition or through our office. Nothing has been more helpful to me in advocating with my colleagues than those real world examples, those real stories, successes and otherwise, that help me make my case in the Senate here. So please keep sharing that information, not just data, but examples, successes, and otherwise. And with that, I do feel bad. I have to excuse myself here. There's another vote on the floor of the Senate that I have to go off to, but I'll turn it over to Edgar for some final discussion here before the session wraps.
Thank you, Senator. Appreciate it. And thank you, everyone, for participating. I think that's all we have for today. Thank you very much for joining. We'll be in touch. Thanks.